All right, good afternoon to those of you who are joining our presentation. Thank you. We'll get started here in just about 2 or 3 minutes in order to provide time for the rest of the participants to log on and join the call. So just sit tight for 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll get started. Good afternoon. It looks like we do have a number of new participants on this call right now. I'm just chiming in to let you know that we're going to get started here in about another minute or so in order to provide more time for additional call participants to join the webinar. And a brief reminder to the other panelists on the call, please do mute yourselves for the time being. Thank you. All right, well, as we have a few final attendees join the call, I'm going to go ahead and get started with a few logistical items. My name's Jessa Coleman, and I'll be presenting myself and my organization in further detail in a few moments here, but I'll be providing most of today's presentation. This is the third presentation in a 3-webinar series. If you happen to have missed the first 2 webinars, they are available online at incog.org/cpace.html. Those webinars have been recorded and the slide decks are available as well. We will be recording this webinar. We will be making this slide deck available. So you don't need to worry about that. Additionally, we will open up to a Q&A session at the end of the call. And that Q&A session, if you have any questions, there should be a Q&A box on your screen that you can use to enter those questions. You can enter your questions at any time during the call. And at the end of the webinar, when we open up to the Q&A, we'll answer all of the questions that have been submitted. Additionally, there will be an opportunity to quote unquote, raise your hand if you want to actually have your microphone turned on so that you can speak your question to the audience. But my colleague Genevieve will explain that when we get to the Q&A portion of this call. So all those logistical items being said, I'm going to go ahead and momentarily turn over the presentation to Adrienne Janes of INCOG for a brief introduction.
Thanks, Jessa. Hi, my name is Adrienne Janes. I am the Energy Programs Coordinator with INCOG, and also on the call today we have Nancy Graham, who's our Air Quality Manager. If you're not familiar with INCOG, we're a voluntary association of local and tribal governments in the Tulsa region. We were established in 1967, and we are one of 11 councils of government across the state. INCOG provides planning and coordination to assist in creating solutions to regional challenges such as comprehensive planning, transportation planning, services for older adults, economic development, environmental quality and energy, and public safety. So that is the very quick overview of what INCOG does. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to working with many of you as we bring PACE to Oklahoma and to many of the counties that you all are working in. So we're so excited that you joined us today. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and we should expect to turn to questions at the end of the hour. Okay, so like I said, my name's Jessa Coleman, and I work for a company called PACE Financial Servicing, or PFS. We are a private company that helps design and administer CPACE programs across the country. We've worked on CPACE programs from Connecticut to Maryland to Virginia to Alaska, and now of course we're also working in Oklahoma and a whole bunch of states in between. But we're very excited to be involved here in Oklahoma. We worked very closely with the Tulsa County government to pilot the first 2 CPACE projects that were closed in the state at the end of 2019. We're going to talk about those projects very briefly at the end of this presentation. And after that, we were asked by NCOG to help them as an expert CPACE consultant to design a Oklahoma CPACE program that would incorporate CPACE best practices as while still suiting the specific needs of Oklahoma stakeholders. So PFS and NCOG are partners here in designing and presenting this Oklahoma CPACE program to all of you today. All right, so I'm going to start out by talking about the fundamentals of CPACE financing, and then we'll dive for most of this presentation into a discussion of the Oklahoma CPACE program itself, with a specific emphasis on the role of local county governments in establishing these programs. We'll close out with 2 case studies of those 2 pilot projects from Tulsa County. And then, like I said, we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So CPACE is a government policy that says that energy efficiency, clean energy generation, water conservation, and resiliency projects on commercial buildings are a public benefit. CPACE itself stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, and that clean energy bit has, that part of the definition has sort of expanded in recent years to include water conservation measures, as well as building resiliency measures. And in Oklahoma, resiliency is one of the components of CPACE that will be considered for eligible CPACE projects, and that's really exciting because the inclusion of resiliency improvements to commercial buildings is something that's sort of new and recent in this CPACE space. So Oklahoma is acting as a bit of a leader and an innovator by including resiliency improvements on these properties as one of the eligible improvements that can be financed through CPACE financing. So in order to make CPACE financing available in a given, not just a given state, but also individual counties, there's several steps that need to take place. So first, the state needs to pass an enabling legislation stating that CPACE financing as a public policy is available within its state. Oklahoma State has done that. The local governments must then establish CPACE within their own jurisdiction by passing an enabling resolution. And that enabling resolution is going to more explicitly describe how CPACE as a policy will function within that county. So it's not enough for the Oklahoma State Legislature to have passed a CPACE statute. Now each individual local county government must pass an enabling resolution that essentially stands up the CPACE financing program within their county. Once those 2 pieces have been completed, at that point, CPACE exists as an open market within your county. Building owners who are interested in utilizing CPACE will be able to select capital providers and contractors to work with in the same way they would for any other improvement project that they're trying to develop for their buildings. Once they've developed those improvement projects, they will apply they will apply for CPACE financing through the CPACE program. And once they've been approved, then the capital provider, the CPACE capital provider, and the borrower will be able to close on financing, and a CPACE assessment will be recorded in the land records securing that financing. So CPACE is not totally unique. CPACE has existed throughout the country for about a decade. CPACE legislation exists in over 37 states in the country, including Oklahoma, but there are 22 states plus Washington, D.C. that have actually successfully financed at least one CPACE project. Those are the states here in green. So we're at the point in the development of this program where we're trying to move Oklahoma from this sort of light brown on my screen to green. We want to successfully, well, we have in fact successfully closed the first 2 pilot projects, but we want to make the program available throughout the state more efficiently. So that's what we're working towards, so that CPACE can be available not only in Tulsa County, but elsewhere in the state. So what are the benefits of CPACE for local governments? CPACE drives job growth, it drives economic development, and it drives clean and efficient energy usage. This is at its most basic level, when you pass a resolution providing for CPACE in your county, you are essentially opening up this private market to outside investment in your communities. So by allowing CPACE within your jurisdiction, you're driving private sector investment into your communities that might not otherwise be available. CPACE is serving as a tool for business owners to decrease their costs and improve the value of their underlying assets, that is, their properties. In improving that underlying asset value, you are also improving the taxable property base for the county itself, so you will see some level of increase in your tax revenues as a county government. You're helping to improve the resiliency of the built environment. Often it's very difficult for local governments to find ways to encourage private property owners to improve their buildings. This is a way to encourage that, to sort of go beyond what you might usually do to improve public buildings. We can now encourage private property owners to improve their buildings as well. You're creating energy efficiency and clean energy jobs by allowing for this program. All of that investment needs to go somewhere, right? It's going into these improved buildings and into more jobs available in your communities in these industries, in the energy and construction industries and the real estate industry. And then if you have efficiency and clean energy standards as a local government that you're mandated to meet, this is another means of achieving those clean energy standards. Most importantly, this program comes at no cost to the local government. And we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail, but CPACE financing, as I've already said, all that you're doing by allowing CPACE in your jurisdiction is creating this particular financial market, and all of the transactions that take place in this market are going to be financed by private capital providers. So this is not a program that requires any government funds, any tax revenues, either to finance individual transactions or to manage. CPACE is particularly attractive during economic downturns. It is an important source of credit for property owners who need to make capital improvements to their properties. often in the form of deferred maintenance, right? They've been looking at needing to replace that HVAC system for the past 5 years, and finally it's done, it's broken, they've got to replace it, and it doesn't matter if we're in an economic downturn or not, right? And so CPACE here is an attractive source of credit for them when other sources of critical capital for non-investment grade buildings have sort of dried up in the market that we're seeing. CPACE financing is underwritten against the long-term asset value of the commercial property. In Oklahoma, we're looking at terms extending up to 30 years. So it's a less risky form of financing for the capital providers that offer CPACE financing because they have these long-term risk horizons. It's a way for property owners to complete the capital stacks for projects that have already been tapped out with their existing mortgage lender. This is essentially one way for property owners to fill gaps in financing that may have been created by construction delays or by cost overruns. And one of the very attractive points of CPACE financing in an economic downturn is that it is repaid on an annual basis, not on a monthly basis. And the very first payment due is typically not due until 12 to 24 months after financing has closed. What this means is that the property owners that are investing in their buildings have time to actually complete that building construction, to complete those improvements and stabilize their properties, stabilize their cash flows, bring on new tenants, etc. And then finally, these energy saving and building resiliency investments are available to be made through private investment, which is particularly helpful when public investment in these areas of energy saving and building resiliency is redirected elsewhere to respond to other pressing economic issues that we're seeing right now. So the Oklahoma CPACE program, that's, like I said, these are the fundamentals of CPACE, and if you'd like to know more about it, we do have 2 other previous webinars, and the first webinar in particular delves into pretty great depth into the benefits of the financing. So I'd encourage you to look up that webinar if you want more information on that. But now we're going to transition to talking about the Oklahoma CPACE program and to talking about how local governments can establish a CPACE program within their county. So the Oklahoma CPACE program is an initiative led by INCOG to develop a CPACE program administrative platform that will be available statewide for any county that chooses to establish a CPACE program. There are 3 steps to developing this administrative platform, or to developing a CPACE program, that is. The first step is to design this administrative platform. That means designing the template resolution that counties will pass enabling CPACE. It means drafting the program contracts and agreements that are necessary to stand up the program. It requires drafting the transactional contracts that will be used for each individual CPACE project. And it involves drafting other program-related documents, such as the guidance manual describing the types of projects that are eligible for CPACE financing, the application checklist, so what are the requirements of an application for CPACE financing to verify that it is eligible, and so on. All of these documents comprise this CPACE program administrative platform, and that is what we at PFS are working to help NCOG develop alongside a steering committee that's comprised of representatives from across the state, from local government, from state government, from the real estate and banking industries and the contracting industry. And we are also hoping to have your, that is local county government's, input on the creation of these documents as well. So this is the step that we are in right now in standing up the Oklahoma CPACE program. The next step is this implementation step. Implementation is the step that we will very shortly be pivoting to. Implementation means reaching out to local governments to educate them about the Oklahoma CPACE program, to solicit your feedback on these documents that we're creating to ensure that they will work for you, for your county, for your constituents, and then to support you, the local governments, in passing this template resolution and adopting this entire platform that we have already created for you, in order to minimize the level of work that's required of local governments in establishing this program. So we're actually sort of in this point of transitioning to the design to implementation stage, particularly through this webinar. Now, the third and final step of a CPACE program is administering it on the day-to-day. And that requires reviewing applications for financing, managing the closing of CPACE transactions once a project has been approved for CPACE financing, onboarding registered capital providers and registered contractors, providing regular outreach, education, and marketing about the program to interested stakeholders, hosting a website about the program, and generally, again, just the general management of an economic development program like this one. All right. Now, as we work to develop this program, there are three core tenets that we have at the forefront of our minds. These three tenets are, first, that this program should be low cost and simple. We want to develop clear and concise program guidelines in the form of a guidance manual so that it is both easy for stakeholders to access and efficient for stakeholders to access, meaning that we can keep the costs of managing a program low. We intend for this to be an open market program. As I've stated before, this is a program that facilitates private investment in commercial properties. In order to facilitate that investment to the greatest degree possible, we believe that open markets catalyze innovation and promote growth, and again, keep the costs down for the actual borrowers, for the participants of those programs, for your constituents. And then finally, we are hoping to develop a standardized program. So as I've already explained, each individual county must adopt or must pass an enabling resolution allowing for CPACE within their jurisdiction, and must adopt a program to a program platform to sort of administer how this program functions. By keeping this program standard, by keeping CPACE financing, the rules around eligibility, the process through which a property owner accesses financing standard throughout the state, we again incentivize and encourage the greatest level of investment possible. If every county in the state were to adopt their own rules around eligibility and were to adopt their own process for applying for financing and their own process for closing individual CPACE transactions. That would make it very, very challenging for capital providers, for contractors, and for property owners who could all be transacting business in different counties throughout the state to understand how this program works, and would either raise the cost of participating in the program for all of those stakeholders, and or would just completely deter them from wanting to participate in this program. So keeping it standard, again, encourages the highest level of participation in the program, and also makes it easiest for you all, the counties, to stand up a program, because you can simply adopt the platform that has been created to serve the entire state, rather than having to develop all of your own transactional and programmatic documents from scratch, right? Which would require a high level of effort from the individual county governments, and that's something we're trying to avoid for you. So let's talk now about the Oklahoma CPACE statute and what it is and what it says. The Oklahoma CPACE statute is housed within the Oklahoma Energy Independence Act. It was, in fact, established several years ago, but in March of this year, INCOG, working with local partners, was able to successfully amend that statute in the most recent state legislative session. The reason that INCOG pursued an amendment to this statute was because when we at PFS worked with Tulsa County to complete the first two pilot projects at the end of last year, the first two CPACE pilot projects, we identified certain parts of the statute that would make it difficult for a CPACE program to be efficiently replicated across the state. So we went back with INCOG and with Tulsa County and with other partners to amend the statute to essentially perfect it in order to make the statute as applicable statewide as possible and as easy for counties and the program to operate under as possible statewide. So what the CPACE statute says now is it authorizes counties to establish a CPACE program by resolution and to retain third-party administration for the program. It clarifies that the purpose of the CPACE program is to facilitate energy and resiliency related upgrades to commercial properties. And in fact, I would immediately like to point out a typo on this slide. It is not commercially zoned properties. It is simply for commercial properties. And that's important because what the statute actually says is that the financing can be used for any property that is not publicly owned and that is not zoned for residential use. So that means this program is going to be eligible for both your run-of-the-mill commercial properties such as retail facilities or office buildings, but also for industrial and manufacturing and agricultural properties, for religious institutions and nonprofits, for private educational facilities in some instances. So one of the amendments that we actually made to the statute was expanding the definition of what types of properties could be eligible here. So I do apologize for that typo in the slide. I hope that's not confusing. And then the statute also states that CPACE financing does not use public funds, that the financing will be offered by private capital providers and secured by a special property tax assessment benefiting the property. And then here we go. Here's the actual line on the slide that clarifies the statute defines eligible property as including all property except single-family residential properties. One final slide on this, because this slide addresses several questions and concerns that were raised during the legislative process. You'll note on this first slide that the statute authorizes private capital providers to provide financing that is secured by a special property tax assessment on the property. Now, one of the questions that came up, one of the concerns that was raised during the legislative process was, well, if this financing is being secured by a special property tax assessment, what is that going to require of counties in terms of servicing that special property tax assessment? And we further amended the CPACE statute to make it very clear that the statute authorizes counties to enter into assessment contracts wherein the property owner consents to the payment of annual CPACE assessments levied by the county, but wherein the private capital provider agrees to invoice, collect, and enforce the CPACE assessments. So even though this is a special property tax assessment that is being recorded in the land records of the county will not be responsible for billing, collecting, or enforcing the CPACE assessments. All of those activities will be taken care of by the private capital providers. Furthermore, the statute authorizes the enforcement of delinquent assessments by the private capital provider in the same manner and with the same priority as the enforcement by the holder of any bond or coupon related to a lien for unpaid assessments. And it then states that county treasurers maintain the right to include a delinquent CPACE assessment in a sale for other delinquent ad valorem property taxes or other special assessments, but it does not require them to do so. And then finally, we addressed another concern that was raised and made sure that the statute clarified that county resale property funds have been exempted from responsibility for any maintenance of expenses related to a property where title has been taken by a county that is subject to a delinquent CPACE assessment. So if a property owner were to not pay their CPACE assessment, and if a county were to take ownership of that property until such time as the property could be resold, the statute clarifies that the county will not be responsible for repaying the CPACE assessment, and that CPACE assessment will continue to accrue and will not be extinguished. So we can, of course, provide the statute in full to any government officials that are interested, but we have made it very, very clear throughout this statute that even though this is a special property tax assessment that's being levied by the county, the financing is being provided by the private markets, the assessment is being serviced by the private markets, and the county has absolutely no responsibility in repaying the assessment in case of any delinquency on the part of the property owner. All right, so all of that legalese aside, let's look real briefly at the CPACE transaction structure in Oklahoma. It's quite straightforward from the point of the property owner. Commercial property owners who are seeking CPACE financing will reach out to a private capital provider, will connect with a capital provider, and will negotiate terms with whatever capital provider they choose to work with, who's willing to offer them CPACE financing. Once the project has been developed and once the terms of financing have been agreed upon between the borrower and the capital provider, an application for CPACE financing will be submitted to the CPACE program to review. This application is used to verify that the project, as it has been designed, comports with state and local CPACE laws, and that it is, per the program guidance manual, an eligible CPACE project. Once the project has been approved, the property owner, the capital provider, and the county will enter into an assessment contract describing the servicing of this assessment and levying the CPACE assessment on the property. And then after that point, the property owner, once the assessment has been levied, the property owner will receive an assessment bill from the capital provider and pay that annual assessment payment concurrent with property taxes each year. So again, it's not going to be billed by the county, but it will be billed by the capital provider at the same time as county property taxes are billed. And then the property owner will repay the capital provider directly. Because this is a special property tax assessment, it is attached to the property that it benefits. And therefore, if the property owner sells the property before the assessment is fully repaid, that outstanding balance will transfer to the new property owner, who will then take over the obligation to continue with the CPACE assessments payment schedule until it has been repaid in full. So the county is essentially enabling this, this transaction structure. So now let's look at the Oklahoma CPACE program structure. Where does the county fit into the overall program in relation to all the other parties that are involved here? So first, we have the program sponsor, INCOG. As Adrienne introduced them at the beginning of this call, they're the convener for Oklahoma CPACE. They've stepped up to lead the design of a uniform CPACE program administrative platform that will be easy for any county to adopt. They are here as a single point of contact for questions about how program administration will work, about how transactions will be reviewed, about how the program is being designed. And they are creating the Oklahoma CPACE program, right? The Oklahoma CPACE program is a suite of standard documents that, as I stated before, will be used to both establish the program and administer individual transactions, including a guidance manual, an application checklist, and other standard forms. And included as part of this program, INCOG will help facilitate the administrative services that may be required to review applications and approve applications for financing. Now, the individual counties throughout Oklahoma will be asked to adopt a resolution establishing PACE in their county. For individual qualifying projects, they will be asked to execute assessment contracts and levy those assessments. And they will be asked to enter into some form of operating agreement regarding the administration of this program, right? So that they don't have to administer the programs themselves. And then when we dial it down even further, we have capital providers who in each county will be providing the financing for eligible projects, who will be underwriting those projects, who will be billing, collecting, and enforcing those assessments, and the property owners who will be developing projects and submitting applications for approval and making annual payments to the capital provider. The county, the capital provider, and the property owner for each individual CPACE transaction will enter into an assessment contract describing the levying, billing, collection, and enforcement of these assessments. So to take a look at this just from a different angle, to help you all understand fully how it works, we have sort of 4 different parties here: the capital provider, the property owner, the program, and the local government. The capital provider will provide the CPACE financing to the property owner, who will in turn make assessment payments back to the capital provider. The property owner will submit applications for approval to the program. The local government will have already adopted an ordinance establishing the program and adopting the program platform. And then as individual projects are submitted to the program and approved for financing, the program will inform the local government, you have a project in your jurisdiction that has been approved for CPACE financing. Will you please execute this contract so that we can levy the assessment on the property? And that is the assessment contract here in the gray box in the middle that is entered into between the local government, the property owner, and the capital provider. So, in final summary, the role of the county to enable CPACE financing in your jurisdiction is to pass a resolution. That's a one-time action we request of you. To adopt the Oklahoma CPACE program. Again, that's a one-time action that we request of you that you will take on through passing this enabling resolution, which again, we are creating for you so that you don't even have to create that yourselves. And then for each individual CPACE transaction, we will request the county to execute an assessment contract and help us record it in the land records. That's all that the county needs to do. All of the other functions of administering this program will be outsourced to third parties, whether it's the program or program partners or individual capital providers. The county will not be asked to do anything other than establish the program and execute individual assessment contracts when projects are approved for financing. So now, and forgive me, I'm a little hoarse. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the key documents that we are working on as part of this program platform. So the first key document is, of course, the template resolution enabling CPACE. This resolution will enable CPACE within a county's jurisdiction as permitted per the state statute. It will define the status of CPACE as a special property tax assessment. It will define the role of the county in the operations of the program, or perhaps more correctly, the lack thereof, the minimal effort requested of the county. It will define the types of projects that constitute as eligible improvements under these buckets of energy efficiency, clean energy, water conservation, and resiliency. And it will authorize the county to contract with a single or multiple third parties to administer this program on their behalf. The assessment contract, one last time, is the tri-party agreement between the county, the property owner, and the capital provider that is executed once per CPACE transaction. In this document, the property owner will voluntarily agree to the levy of the CPACE assessment by the county. The property owner will confirm that he or she agrees to pay the annual assessment payments to the capital provider. This document will include the CPACE assessment payment schedule so that each party knows precisely how much is due in a given year on this CPACE assessment payment. And this document will describe the repayment and enforcement mechanisms of the assessment. So the fact that the capital provider is servicing the assessment payments. This document is the document that will be recorded in the land records of the county where the property is located in order to evidence the assessment, the CPACE assessment on the property. And then the final primary document is the guidance manual. This guidance manual clarifies the eligibility of properties and improvements. It describes in detail the application process for applicants for CPACE financing and lists out precisely what documents are required as part of that application. And it includes all of the template forms that are required for an individual CPACE application and transaction if it's approved. So is there a cost to the county? We've already said there is not, and I'd simply like to circle back and briefly explain why, right? Because someone has to pay for this program. There's of course no cost to the county to establish a resolution and adopt the program. INCOG has raised funds to cover the design of all of these documents so that counties do not need to front the cost of designing the documents themselves. And the program will reimburse its costs of administering individual transactions and administering the program through a fee on each CPACE application. These fees are minimal, and they and these fees are paid by the actual property owner out of the proceeds of the financing, right? So it is the beneficiaries of the program that are paying the cost of program administration. Counties may charge fees in one instance, and that is to cover the costs of collecting delinquent assessments if they choose to do so, as permitted by law. And if they do choose to charge fees for collecting delinquent assessments, then those fees would be set by the Board of County Commissioners. All right, so where are we in more detail in developing this program and making it available throughout Oklahoma? As I stated before, we amended the state statute in the first half of this year, back in March. Over the past few months, we've been developing a draft guidance manual. That draft guidance manual has already been shared with INCOG and with its steering committee. We are now in the third and final webinar of a webinar series whose intention has been to raise awareness about the program and educate stakeholders about the program, and to solicit feedback on this guidance manual. So in August, we will be publishing the guidance manual for review by the public, and that will be your opportunity to review the guidance manual and to provide feedback on eligibility of individual projects and property owners for this program. And once we receive public feedback on that document, we will finalize it and publish it alongside all of the other template documents that have been created to enable this program for all of you. What this means is that we are working towards a early fall deadline for applications to be available. Sorry, excuse me. We're working towards early fall for all of these documents to be complete so that property owners can begin developing applications for financing, and counties can begin passing resolutions if they choose to do so, enabling CPACE. And the legislative amendment that that was passed by the state legislature back in March will take effect in November. So those are the sort of broad strokes that we're working towards. All right, 2 quick case studies. What will CPACE look like for you? These are the 2 Tulsa pilot projects that we closed at the turn of the year. The Tulsa Club accessed $3.2 million of private financing to fund the renovation and conversion of the historic Tulsa Club hotel building into a 90-room Hilton Curio hotel. The Holiday Inn Express and Suites in downtown Tulsa accessed $1.7 million for the renovation of this 116-room hotel. Both of these hotels used CPACE financing to fund sustainable design elements such as efficient heating, cooling, plumbing, and lighting systems, and building envelope improvements. And again, all of the financing used in these projects was provided by a private capital provider. So these are the types of commercial projects that CPACE enables. All right, so now I'm gonna switch it over to a Q&A. Genevieve tells me we don't have too many, but we'll see. And I'd also like to highlight that we strongly, strongly encourage you to schedule individual meetings with us and with INCOG to discuss this process in further detail, to answer questions that you might have regarding your specific county and so on. So I will open it up to Genevieve to share the questions.
Great, thank you, Jessa. We have a question through the Q&A chat, which I'll start with, but I do think we don't have the raise your hand function currently enabled. Okay, all right, so I think folks are now able to raise their hands as well, which is great. So like I said, I will start with the Q&A that have been submitted in writing. And please also feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you to ask your question. So the first question that we received early in the webinar, which I'm happy to attempt to address because it's a very good question, was whether CPACE financing will be eligible for properties lying within land subject to Indigenous sovereignty. I know this is a very topical question in Oklahoma just now. What we can tell folks today is that the statute as written really only contemplates counties establishing programs through resolution. And further, these CPACE special assessments are classified in such a way that they are levied by counties, which is to say there has to be a county with statutory authorities to levy assessments in the first place. So this is certainly a question that we'll be digging into more with council, but currently I would say we don't expect programs to operate outside of regularly kind of chartered and established counties. All right. So we have another question about fees, which is a great question. And Jess, I think I can address this one as well. The question was, what is the fee based on? Is it sort of the cost of the project, or I imagine something else? Typically, administrative fees are based on kind of the net proceeds of the project. So obviously there may be other closing costs outside of the administrative approval. For example, the capital provider may have closing fees, there may be capitalized interest or other fees related to the project. Those fees all have to be taken into consideration, as well as the actual costs of the improvements themselves. So those are all considered eligible costs under the program. And then the administrative fee would be based on the kind of those net proceeds. And it typically is set as a percentage of that figure, oftentimes with some kind of upper limit or a cap. Since there is no maximum loan size for CPACE financing, these projects can get quite large. And so there's kind of a commercially reasonable limit within which the fees don't really need to extend over. All right. Any other questions that anyone would like to ask, either in writing or through raising their hand?
Hey Genevieve, this is Adrian from INCOG. I just wanted to add on one thing to the answer on the Indigenous sovereignty question. And I would just like to say our goal is for it to work wherever there is a desire for it to work. So if there is an issue with it working on tribal lands, we would very much welcome the opportunity to work with the tribal authorities and the state to figure out how to make it work. So so our goal is for it to be yes, although we can't give any straight answer right now. Our goal is for that to be a yes if they want it.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that addition. All right, I'm going to call on Scott Lambert. Scott, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time on this. I have just a couple questions on that first slide. Jessa, that you showed the water conservation. Does that equal stormwater remediation? What's the definition of water? I know it's a little bit in the weeds, but what is water conservation viewed as?
Yeah, we are still working on definitions. That's one of actually the big sections, components of the guidance manual that we're still working through. Stormwater management is something that has been financeable in other states, and I think whether it fell under water conservation or whether it fell under building resiliency, I think it would fall under one of the two here in Oklahoma. So again, I don't have a hard answer for you yet, but I expect that stormwater management will be eligible to some degree.
Great. Thank you, Jessa. We had a question from Carrie Rowland. And Carrie, I think you may have lowered your hand, but I'm going to open up your speaker in case you did want to ask that question.
Yeah, I have a question about will there be a committee that helps approve and provide approval for projects once they're submitted?
Great question. So the project application and approval process is typically not by committee. What you will see in the program handbook and guidelines is a very, very straightforward set of legal and technical standards for all applications that projects need to meet to comply with the enabling statute in Oklahoma, and a very straightforward application checklist to make sure that the requisite documentation is included to demonstrate compliance with that law. So just as an example, Carrie, one of the documents that would be included in an application checklist is a title summary of the property, or a title insurance that shows who the legal owner of the property is, as well as any mortgages or encumbrances on the property where that lien holder would need to execute a consent form. That's kind of the standard accepted document to demonstrate who legally owns the property. So the process is meant to be very, very straightforward, such that INCOG and its partners can easily and objectively approve applications based on these technical standards and guidelines. So there wouldn't be like a separate committee that, that reviews each deal outside of that process. But certainly that is why we are looking for stakeholder input in the guidebook itself and that application checklist. All right, I'll invite others to raise their hand. Meanwhile, just one other question which was from Robin Slater. She asked if these projects are eligible for gas utility rebates for upgrading equipment, for example, HVAC or water heaters. And the answer to that is yes. CPACE financing can be utilized alongside all other forms of incentive programs as well as other forms of financing. So this is meant to be complementary, and property owners will be eligible for all of those rebates and certainly are encouraged to take advantage of them. All right. So seeing no additional hands, and also since we're close to the end of our time, I'll just hand this back to Adrian at INCOG to close us out. And I'll thank you all again also for your time and for joining us today.
Thanks to all of you who joined today. Thank you to Jessa and Genevieve for all the work they are doing to bring this program to bear here in Oklahoma. I do want to make one slight correction. So Jessa said that INCOG has raised funds to cover all the program costs. We actually are still raising funds to cover all the program costs. So if any of you are interested and able or aware of any entities who could benefit from PACE, who might be in a position to help us build this program and bring it as far reaching in Oklahoma as we possibly can, I would love to schedule a call with you to talk about how that might look. We have some fundraising information on the Oklahoma CPACE page there that was referenced earlier. And so if any of you would like to have that conversation, we more than welcome it. But again, just want to thank everyone who joined us today to learn about PACE, and we are always happy to take your questions offline or later. So thank you very much, and let us know how we can help bring PACE to your county. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.